なんでそのホラーゲームが人気のジャンルとして今も残っているかっていうのを、僕が想像するに、やっぱり人間の本質に限りなく近いところにあるんだろうね。
Humans have been telling stories to scare each other since the dawn of time, and I think every time a piece of technology has come along, whether it's printing press or film or or radio dramas, and it's like every time media evolves, it's one of the first things that somebody ends up making a scary story with it.
Yellow creature gobbles dots while being pursued through maze by monsters.
Video games are the latest craze to sweep the country and most of the world, too.
The interest in electronic games apparently is at an all-time high.
1 billion games are played every month.
There are those who say the impact of video games isn't all good.
Some youths are becoming spaced out on the space games.
Now, I'm a kid of the 80s, right? So the explosion of the video game craze hit us in 1983 with arcades and all the big arcade games.
The most advanced video game you can play is awaiting your discovery at Showbiz Pizza Place.
I remember one of the first times being scared by a game would be like Dragon's Lair.
Dragon's Lair, the supreme adventure in video games.
Like when you died in Dragon's Lair, you became the skeleton. I lost a lot of money on that stupid game. 50 cents, come on.
Williams Electronics dares you to climb into your interceptor to hyperspeed into the outer limits of space and be face to face with Sinister.
Beware, I live.
You're trying to run away while you're trying to mine these little asteroids all over the place, and it's like, run, coward!
Run, coward!
Scariest game in the arcades. It was so good.
I absolutely think of Sinistar or Otto, who was the bouncing ball in Berserk who would come after you.
Intruder alert, intruder alert.
As an archetype for modern horror creatures who are stalking you. They provided that same level of, oh my God, I gotta get out, I gotta stay alive, I gotta get out, I gotta stay alive.
Beware, I live.
Everything old is new, right? That idea of the stalker in a game, that didn't just come from the games you play now, that came from games long ago. Certainly 3D Monster Maze has one of the all-time great stalkers in that dinosaur.
We're always looking for the roots. The label survival horror came in '96. But then everyone tried to understand what was the precursor. Then we went back to the history of horror game and then we say, okay, Haunted House, Atari 2600 was the first survival horror because you had to get to this dark house. Then you got Ant Attack, top-down view with two characters with those giant ants that you got to run away. And then you got a game that I discovered later, Forbidden Forest. 83, scrolling games when you had, monster coming in the background. So trying to say that, there's survival horror exists before '96, as a scholar, I have really a real difficulty because the label didn't exist. So we're trying to, label something back then that was not taught in that vision.
Original Resident Evil 1, what is it? It's a bunch of people in a scary mansion where something is going wrong. That's what Sweet Home is. But it's also really interesting because it's a turn-based JRPG where you fight the ghosts. And you had all these different characters who had different abilities that you had to kind of use to navigate your way through this mansion.
日本映画の面白男伊丹十三があのスイートホームのファミコン化に成功したぞ。
Sweet Home was based off of the film of the same name, Sweet Home.
呪われた屋敷に閉じ込められてしまった5人のテレビ取材班。この5人を操作して1人でも多く脱出させるのが君の使命だ。
そもそもスイートホーム自体がやっぱりホラー描写のいい傾向が多いんですよね。でそれ結構ゲームでも反映されていて。
And when you see some of the screenshots for it, they're genuinely like horrifying. There's this one really iconic image. There is just this skeleton with like its flesh melting off, reaching towards you. And it is a really effective piece of horror.
スイートホームは僕の中でホラーテイストのゲームとピュアホラーのゲームって結構明確に区別してるんですね。で、スプラッターハウスとかってすごく好きだし大好きなゲームだけど、あれはホラーテイストのゲームなんですよ。で、なぜかっていうと、やっぱり主人公が強くて、で、クリーチャーとかも不気味ではあるけど、普通に倒すべきエネミーでしかないんですよね。でも、ホラーならではのシステムっていうのも組み込まれてないものなので、それはホラーテイストのゲーム。初めてのピュアホラーのゲームだと思ってるのがスイートホームなんですよ。で、なぜかっていうと、やっぱり死んだキャラクターが復活しなくて、で、どんどん少ない人数で、味方が減っていく恐怖とか。
It all takes place because a mother lost her child who climbed into an incinerator. The mother started bringing children back to the house and killing them so her child would have ghost friends. That has stuck with me for years, and I will never forget that.
The idea that it happened so many years before Resident Evil or Alone in the Dark or anything else is kind of insane. There's that feeling where it was not a power fantasy. You were not the Ghostbusters. You were not obliterating this mansion. You had to think about how to move forward. You had to consider how to move your party members and like avoid putting them in dangerous situations. There's so much of survival horror's legacy that goes back to Sweet Home.
The first horror game that I played that I would say felt like a horror game to me was probably Alone in the Dark. You know, before that, in the 80s, I don't feel like the graphics fidelity was enough to feel like I was in a horror game. But Alone in the Dark felt spooky.
It's the kind of place ghosts run away from in terror.
In Alone, we put down all the ceilings. We squeeze the corridors because we wanted to give the player an impression of to be prisoner of the house. Fear comes first with claustrophobia.
How can I describe what I saw? No. What words are capable of explaining such evil?
There wasn't really jump scares to it, but it was the idea of horror inside a story that was happening to the character's psyche that was unraveling.
The game is cut in 3 acts because of the geography of the scenes, of the scenery. It's like the old house of Psycho. the attic is the subconscious of the house, you know, because this house is like is a character.
Yeah, you don't have many resources in Alone in the Dark. There's few ammunition in the game, a limited inventory. So you cannot, just bring all the stuff with you around. You have to decide, do I leave the lantern on the floor? What do I bring with me?
アローイン・ザ・ダークは非常にインパクトありましたね。初めて見たときやっぱり、これは完全にクトゥルフの世界だなと思いました。やっぱり主人公が思いっきり弱くて敵が異常な強さを持っていて、であとやっぱり死んだ後までちゃんと演出がある。死んだ後っていうか気絶した後ですけど、ずるずる引きずられていくとか。
This was a game that used cinematic camera angles to really great effect to create a feeling of suspense, not knowing what was lurking around the corner.
The immersion was brilliant, and it's kind of that first experience of something smashing through a window. And you're really trying to kind of pivot and tank control your way back out of it.
If you really know everything about the game, you could play in 20 minutes. So we try to find out things to give the impression to the gamer that it's a huge and big house. So Cambi walks like a kind of dancer, It's like this, yeah. It's very slowly.
Those little challenges, you weren't just fighting monsters, you were fighting the controls.
But in a lot of ways, it's the same feeling of like trying to run away from something in real life and tripping over. Your stupid fucking body will not listen to you, And there's a real tension to that.
Edward Carnby looks like he's ready to kind of do a jolly old Englishman fist fight when he's fighting the zombies. And there's nothing quite like charging up a big kick or punch and then you miss. And then you're dead. So that's the joy of Alone in the Dark.
Luckily, devil worship makes me smile. So this is my idea of a paid vacation.
I would say Alone in the Dark. And yeah, maybe Clock Tower 2 kind of set the stage for the kind of mood you should aim for. I think they're examples of how important the mood is and how you use things like camera angles and ambient music to really reinforce that mood.
So Clock Tower, I could be wrong about this, but it was one of the first instances with the idea of a stalker enemy. And stalker enemies are a particular kind of enemy that generally only really appear in horror games because they don't make sense for any other type of game. What is like a primary function in most video games? Navigating a world. How well do you know this level? How well do you know where like its safe points are, where its item pickups are, all this kind of stuff? Now, what happens when you drop an invincible monster into that game that is designed to follow you? And in the case of Clock Tower, it was the Scissor Man.
It's so subtle and it really gives you a sense of unease because nothing happens for a little while. You're just going around meeting people. Then all of a sudden, bang, Scissor Man turns up.
You just hear the scissors and you hear the music kick up and then you know you're in danger now. Scissor Man can come at any point and you have to get your character to safety as quickly as you can.
シリアルキラーに追われる恐怖って、要は抵抗手段がないっていうことですよね。だから逃げるしかないっていうことで、だからそうなった時点ですごくもう一番怖いシチュエーションで。
So the classical video game protagonist is very athletic, that has the ability to defend themselves and, handles their task really well. But in a horror game, it makes sense to be someone who is not athletic, doesn't even want to do the things that they're doing and just wants to get the hell out of there. You don't hear the synopsis for a horror game and think, I wish I was that person. That would be great. Like that's not the case. It's more that you read a synopsis for a horror story or a horror game and you're like, oh God, that would really crap being them.
絶望の時間が長ければ長いほど怖いと思ってるんですよ。例えば深海でスキューバダイビングしてた時に大きな貝に足を挟まれてで抜けなくなって、でも酸素ボンベの酸素残量はどんどん減っていくけどどうしようもない。その時間の恐ろしさってすごいじゃないですか。
But you can also see, if you play it today, you're like, oh wow, this is so annoying to play. And this is a really big design issue in horror games. In Mario, you have to think, okay, what is the best way of jumping from one place to another? What's the most fun? But in a horror game, you think more like, okay, what sort of movement would create the emotions I'm after?
できるだけリアルなホラーにしたかったんで、リアルな人間ってずっと走れないよねっていう。で僕はやっぱり追いかけられる夢とかよく当時見てて、やっぱり必ず息切れして走れなくなった時にクリーチャーに追いつかれるんですよ。だからやっぱりそういう怖さっていうのを
For one of the first times in video games, you're not charged with tackling, an enemy head on and trying to defeat them. You have to hide, you have to outwit them. And I think that really resonated with a lot of people.
クロックタワーが今もファンに愛していただいている理由、やっぱりちょっと自分で言うのは恥ずかしいですけど、それなりにエポックメイキングだったんじゃないかなと思ってます。やっぱりその逃げるだけのゲーム、ホラーのジャンルの一つとして逃げるだけのゲームっていうのをやっぱり最初に作り上げてるっていうところで、ある程度ユーザーの方に、リスペクトいただいてるのかなと思ってます。
Clock Tower really had a strong impact in terms of advancing horror with atmosphere, but it wasn't until a year later that Resident Evil came along and really had that global impact.
Thinking back to the original Resident Evil, I remember it being one of the first 3D cinematic experiences in a game.
Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Resident Evil.
I think, before that there was Alone in the Dark, but with Resident Evil, it was much more cinematic focused, less Lovecraftian and more in-your-face horror. You walking around that corner and a zombie biting you in the back of the neck and you have to shake off the zombie.
一番三上さんの一番最初の初代のね、一番オリジナルの作品がやっぱ衝撃的ですよね。カメラの使い方ってすごいなっていうのは。当時はそんなカメラがすごいとか思って遊んでなかったんですけど、やっぱ僕らゲーム作ってる側からするとやっぱり仕掛けってやっぱすごいなっていう、あれを最初にやった三上さんすごいなって思いますよね。
There's no doubt that Resident Evil changed the game when it came to horror gaming. The first game blew the lid off of what was possible in horror games. First of all, it took a very well-known genre of horror films, the zombie genre, certainly heavily borrowed from the god George Romero. And it just was like nothing you'd ever seen.
After 5 minutes, you just meet your first zombie eating one of your colleagues in a corridor. It starts like that. After that, you just go in a corridor and you got 2 fucking dogs coming out of the window.
That was a genuine jump scare, a trigger moment for me right there. I was like, wow, these games are highly visceral.
Wow, you know, for the beginning of a game, it's shocking and then it marks your mind.
Hurry! This way! That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Resident Evil 1 is definitely iconic as an experience when you explore that universe for the first time. But I think that Resident Evil 2 adds something even more polished and special.
You feel like you belong in the shoes of Leon.
What have we got here?
Because it's his first day, he doesn't really know what he's doing.
What are these things?
So when you go into that world, when you go into Raccoon City, he doesn't know much about it, and neither do you.
I liked it so much, I stayed up for almost 3 days. I hardly slept at all.
Oh, really?
I haven't been to bed.
Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down!
More than anything else that really got my attention was the different perspectives on the character.
Name's Leon Kennedy. Nice to meet you.
Mine's Claire. Claire Redfield. I came to find my brother, Chris.
I remember playing that through as Leon and then straight away going back and I'm like, I'm doing this as Claire straight away. I had no desire to play anything else.
That was the first game where the stalker element was brought in with Mr. X. I think a lot of people assume that Nemesis was the first character like that in the series, but Mr. X was.
The boss who breaks through the wall that doesn't happen the first time you play it, it scared the shit out of me. I just was really moved by that moment and sort of the power of the medium to leave this lasting impression. If you can create something that leaves a lasting impression on people that they talk about for years later, then I think as creators, we've done our job. And that specific moment for me was like, okay, I've never seen this before. I love this. I want to see more of it. If I was going to make a video game, I want to do the same kind of things.
You're right. This is just the beginning.
So I would say horror on the PS1 was shaped by the console's technical limitations in some really interesting ways. One of them was the idea of pre-rendered backgrounds. The idea that there was not enough juice in that machine to do proper 3D backgrounds.
Although the PlayStation was a 3D console capable of rendering games with full polygons,
Users lose all sense of reality and enter another world.
the cost of making that happen, and at the point in which Resident Evil was released, which is early on in the PlayStation's life cycle, when developers weren't as familiar with the hardware, that led to the use of pre-rendered backgrounds.
The way we're going to create the illusion of 3D is that once your character hits a certain point, we are going to cut to a different shot. Like maybe this one shot is overhead and then this camera cuts and the next shot, the character is now facing the camera. You see precisely what the game wants you to see. Like, it's not even a workaround for limitations, it's limitation causing genuine, creatively brilliant decisions. Then, of course, infamously, you have the mist of Silent Hill.
That first generation PlayStation had a draw distance of about 2 feet in front of your nose before you get pop-up or, artifacts and things happening. So they solved that, and they just brought the fog plane like right there. And then they were like, wow, that's actually scary to move through that. And I feel like that must have been the aha moment where Silent Hill was born.
一番最初はやっぱりさっき言ったバイオハザードが登場してきて、すごいホラーゲームっていうジャンルがまだホラーゲームっていうジャンルが出来上がる多分前だと思うんですけど、ああいう恐怖をテーマにした作品を作ろうっていうことになって、サイレントヒルっていうのがチームが出来上がって。
My first experience in the Silent Hill world was my co-writer Patrick had picked up this game, and I remember watching Patrick play this game where he's walking through the fog, and he keeps walking through fog, and you hear a dog bark. And you come around a corner and you can't see more than 10 feet in front of you. And I'm like, this is terrifying.
The very first 5 minutes of the game are amazing. You see this disparate group of images, you hear this guitar twang playing this theme song, and you don't know, like, are we watching a flash forward, a flashback? What's reality? Because sometimes we're in the car with Harry and Cheryl, and sometimes we're like seeing the nurse and all these other things, and then we see Sybil, we crash. And then there's a guy named Harry, and he's just literally on a street, and off you go.
It's one of the games that's both visually horror and narrative horror at the same time. It's one of the very few games that actually does a really good job of that. I love my Resident Evil. Resident Evil is awesome, but it is basically, this guy is an even bigger demon than the last one, how am I going to take him down? Silent Hill, on the other hand, is...
What is this?
Oh my gosh, this thing is going to affect me deeply for the next few days.
At a time where scary games were kind of more about gore, or it was gun-based violence and shooters and things like that, Silent Hill just made this like very slow burn, slow-paced, very claustrophobic, psychological horror game that clearly just rang everybody's bell in the horror genre.
I'd seen games that had stuff that assaulted you and stuff that attacked you and monsters and whatnot, but I'd never seen a game that was relying on the absence of danger to be dangerous. So much of what makes Silent Hill so creepy is what you don't see. It's the sound design, it's the fact that you can't see that far in front of you, it's what could be around the corner that maybe never is. That's what makes Silent Hill so terrifying.
I'm so scared. Help me.
Silent Hill was a game about just fucking nightmares. It was a game about you can't go back to this thing that once was. And in the case of Silent Hill 1, it's this idea of memories. This little girl's memories that slowly become corrupted after she went through all these awful things, and you are now experiencing them.
No, I don't want to.
Do what Mommy tells you now.
It felt dark and it felt horrifying and it felt personal. You know, it felt like something that was made by people that are hurting. Like, you know, people that were struggling in their own way. It just became so distinctive and beautiful to anything else that was coming out on the PlayStation at the time. It wasn't a mascot platformer. It wasn't that edgy brand of PS1 game. As much as it was told, be a clone of Resident Evil, it didn't feel like anything else. And it's to this day a fucking incredible game.
In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.
So I think my most memorable horror gaming experience would actually be the trailer for Silent Hill 2.
James, honey, did something happen to you? Are you confusing me with someone else?
It's such a strange and iconic trailer. And the monsters, like the scary stuff, it's nearly an aside. What that trailer really puts across is like kind of the just really distinctive vibe of Silent Hill 2 and like this town that doesn't exist anywhere and is broken and wrong.
I'm not your Mary.
Imagine making a game where the narrative is the central focal point of the game and everything else works in with that. The gameplay, the graphics, you know, the audio. All of these come together to be something bigger than the sum of its parts, but centrifugal to all of that is the narrative.
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said, Mary. My wife's name. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago. Could Mary really be there?
Describe essence of great horror game. Atmosphere, quiet feeling. What I noticed, maybe I like quietness. Walking on the road at the night. This is good feeling for me. Why? Maybe I'm feeling something omen. Something happened to me.
This town, there's something wrong with it.
I guess I really don't care if it's dangerous or not. I'm going to town either way.
I think the prevailing feeling for me when I play Silent Hill 2 is a feeling of aloneness. Just terrible desolation and solitude, and every sound is magnified, the drip of the water or the echoes of your footsteps. I think that time that is spent doing nothing except being alone works on you in a certain way that other things don't. It's a question of tempo. When am I going to get out of here? How am I going to get out of here? It lets you sort of soak in your own misery.
Think about it. A new genre is called walking simulator. Many of the walking simulators are all about horror and, scary experience because you don't need to have, big action. You don't need to render all those big monsters. You just have to make people walk in a scary place and then play on their mind.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife.
I will state to the end of my days that it's got to be one of the best stories in any video game I've ever seen.
You could be her twin. Your face, your voice, just your hair and clothes are different.
My name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I?
Mr. Owaku, he was the guy who wrote the original script, and he was originally just a programmer on Silent Hill 1, from what I understand. And he was a very quiet, very dark guy, always dressed in black, never smiled. But he wrote this incredibly sensitive, beautiful, complex story that allowed for just tremendous insight into the characters.
Thank you for saving me. But I wish you hadn't.
Whenever he asked me, you know, how does this feel? What does this sound like? We would have a very close conversation about things like, what's Mary's motivation here? What's James' motivation here? What kinds of the feeling are you trying to elicit in this scene? In some cases, even, he would change the Japanese if he felt that the English needed to be changed.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
I remember playing it in high school, and the more of life that I experienced, the more I appreciated the themes of the game. You know, this is like an embodiment of your pent-up sexual aggression, or this is a metaphor for sickness, or for a metaphor for someone's trauma with an abusive family member, things like that.
When I first went in there for a meeting, they had asked me to come to Tokyo to talk to them. And we sat together in a big meeting room. They were basically asking me my input as an American. They were still talking about the themes that they wanted to go for. What about abortion? Can we show a fetus or bloody fetus? And so we talked about some of those things and how much pushback and what kind of a reaction they might expect.
Or you could just force me. Beat me up like he always did.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head.
So much of what's great about Silent Hill 2 is like, you are playing this sad, lonely man. You feel his sluggish movements. You nearly feel like his complete ineptness. In a way that I don't think you can write into a script and shoot.
Mary's going to die? You must be joking.
I'm very sorry.
What a great horror game is it takes something that we are all afraid of, and then you don't get to be a bystander.
What do you want, James?
I brought you some flowers.
Flowers? I don't want any damn flowers. Just go home already.
You have to be there. You have to be in that space, and you have to deal with that world. I think that's really, really special.
James, wait. Please don't go. Stay with me.
And so when the conclusion of that game hits and you realize what he is.
Please, James. Tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not going to die. Help me.
It's staggering because it's you. You know, like, it is you. And like, that's what horror games can do.
Mary?
James.
Silent Hill 2 is definitely mind-blowing when I first played it. This was a game that I pretty much inhaled. Like, I think I finished it at like 3 a.m. Like, this was a game where I was like, I feel like I'm into the final stretch. I can't disengage from it. I'm just gonna keep playing. And I remember, 3 a.m., you have like Mary's letter coming up.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
And I was like crying, and then I sat for like half an hour being like, what have I just witnessed?
When I first learned that I was going to die. I just didn't want to accept it.
I cry every single time I hear her do that. And I cried on the set, and she cried on the set. And I think everybody cried on the set. It was a deeply emotional thing to write at the time. And it's even more deeply emotional now for me. Because my wife died 2 years ago, you know. My wife's death has reframed the way I see James now, and the way I understand how James got to be, you know, so messed up about it.
I want you to know this, James. I'll always love you.
If I got a letter from my dead wife, hell yeah, I would go to a special place. I'd be confused, but I also might start to question my own memories, my own sanity. I might start to, you know, bring up all sorts of feelings of guilt and yeah, that letter, it's a killer.
James, you made me happy.
音楽って人に聴かせたいから作るんですけど、音楽ってね。でもゲーム音楽って聴かせるために作ったらいけないんだな。やっぱりゲームはゲームを体験したいためのゲームなので、だから聴かせるための音楽を作るんじゃなくて、その中でゲームの中にどれだけこう馴染ませるというか、そういう音楽作りっていうのが必要なのかなっていうのは思いますよね。
Yamaoka showed that you could actually put almost the opposite of what music you would expect. I think he took like a massive step on for horror music in general, and you hear that element in Silent Hill. There's an element of trip hop there, you know, where it's slowed down beats. It kind of fits that dreamlike world. But I really think it was revolutionary to put the combination of music choices that he did together. It's like from ambient stuff that resembled maybe like what was in Jacob's Ladder or something like that. Was very discordant and almost mechanical sounding, industrial sounding, to these beautiful kind of sweet, ghostly melodies.
Yeah, just so memorable. I think like at the time, Quake came out and they had the Trent Reznor score there, which was a similar thing where it wasn't really musical. It was sounds and it was atmospheric. I think both those games at the time with these kind of industrial soundtracks, for me, was kind of next level.
Yamaoka also produced all the sound effects, a total of 50 sounds, not counting the nuances. They too break with the sound rules applicable to the horror survival game.
So yeah, for me, you know, Yamaoka's genius is the soundscapes, you know. That horrible echoing, the horrible footsteps, the horrible shrieks and background noises that just get you so nervous.
サイレントヒルっていう企画ができた時に、このタイトルであれば僕はゲーム音楽っていうのを変える、ちょっと違う音楽でもないものをはめるってことで、その先が見えないのもそうですけど、
There are certain visceral sounds that are just almost atavistic in their evocation of fear. And they're usually, often, wild animals. One of the nastiest things I've ever heard is a pig screaming. It's horrendous.
Sound from the very beginning of games has always been an element of the horror of it. Space Invaders plays a heartbeat. Ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. The more Space Invaders you kill, it gets faster and faster and faster and faster.
Horror is probably like 60 or 70% about sound. Sound that you hear that you don't know what's going to be, so you know there's something coming, but you cannot picture it. Sound of, your own footstep on an empty street. Music, industrial sound.
The sound creates words, universe. You change the sound, you change the world, you change the universe. It's dramaturgy.
On a more micro level, I think that the essence of making good horror sounds are tapping into those universal, scary sounds that inherently terrify us. Cracking bones, gush, stabs, an echoey chamber where something might be dripping or moving, things closing in on you. Those are all inherent, scary moments for us as humans.
Fuck is that?
I remember doing the Rat King in Last of Us 2, and when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, these guys, their imagination is off the charts.
There are so many audio cues of what you're about to experience as you're getting closer, but you don't know what it is, so you just feel that building unease. Something is here. It's huge. I'm not going to be able to fight it. What is going on? And then when you finally get it,
just the sound alone of hearing is like having a spider running at you. It's creepy. It's a really creepy sound hearing all those feet happen. Oh, and I think it actually had like saliva in its mouth, so we had to do this kind of sticky, gooey sound when it would open its mouth.
because it's a chase sequence, you can't constantly look back and like see what he's doing. You can't really rely on the visual horror as much. You have to rely on the sounds of it's getting closer, it's getting farther away. Such a good use of the sound design to make me really tense and make me have to run faster.
I don't think you can have a great horror experience without great sound. But it's so easy to not notice it also. And actually, to a certain extent, it's part of what makes a great soundtrack or a great soundscape, right? Is the fact that it's not intrusive and it's just there to take everything else and raise it up.
And sometimes it's as simple as those intimate moments. They sit on a couch and they take their backpack off.
All the serious talk, I almost forgot.
Those are the moments that make you feel like you're dealing with real people. I'm not watching animated people. I'm really in the room with them.
All right, I'm pooped.
I think that sound is so important to horror because it helps to build the anticipation, and also the sound of the actor's voice really matters.
What are you doing this? Get the fuck off me!
The voice gives the life of the character. It gives intensity.
No! No!
Everything is in this. It's not only in the gesture, in the behavior. It's in the voice. It's important. Really important.
I'll fucking kill you.
The mood of a horror game is what makes it scary or not. You need that mood of the game to be able to draw the audience in and make them feel like they're in that actual game.
Horror is a vibe. It's a feeling. People feel horror, people feel fear, and you can feel fear in any genre of video games. You could feel fear when you're playing Tetris because everything keeps falling too fast. Like, people have to feel some sort of tension in response to that.
The first game that I played that scared me was the original Myst, which isn't a horror game and isn't particularly scary, but I was a very sensitive young child, so it just had this atmosphere, because it's like just you on this completely abandoned, weird set of different islands, and at one point you find like this secret area and you go into it and it's just this horrible like murder chamber, like, I guess is the best way to put it.
The best example of horror that I've ever had in a game is in Warcraft 3 with Arthas, when Arthas slowly turns and you suddenly have to go murder an entire village.
These people have all been infected. This entire city must be purged.
That to me was absolutely horrifying, and I stopped playing Warcraft 3 for about a week because the game had taken me on a path I did not want to go. I did not want to be the bad person.
I think it's good for other games to have a little bit of that sense of horror. I felt it in Red Dead Redemption even, where I'm just out in the wilderness on my own and just a creepy feeling of it. You do get a sense of power from a lot of games, whereas, you know, horror is the opposite feeling, and I think it does benefit a lot of games where you can counterbalance some of that power play with feeling smaller.
And I guess I think back to Max Payne as kind of one of the horror games that does a really good job of that.
Max, no, please, Max. Why? I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
The whole sequence in Max Payne, that game, I was so lost in it for a long time. The baby and the whole thing with walking along that red line. And I love when games do that, when non-horror games have a little moment that sort of switch things up for a moment.
No, please, God, no.
If you sit someone down today and have them play Thief, they're still going to be scared by some parts of that game. It gets really tense and weird.
Playing the original Thief: The Dark Project on PC, there's a sequence in that game where you go deeper and deeper into the earth. That kind of level of the 3D geometry in those games like had enough weight to it that even though it was kind of crude, I genuinely felt that I was descending deeper and deeper beneath the earth, and I could feel like the weight of all that kind of dirt above me, and it felt extremely scary and claustrophobic.
The sound that the ghosts make is not like a ooh ghost sound, it's like a screams from the depths of hell sort of ghost sound.
The thing about Thief is you never knew what was around the corner, if it was gonna be another guard or something really weird. So it managed to be scary without trying.
The Shalebridge Cradle. It used to be an insane asylum, and before that, it was an orphanage.
When anybody talks about Thief 3, they're like, yeah, not as good as the first two games, but robbing the cradle, though.
I'm used to the dark, but this feels like a house with bad dreams.
There have been entire think pieces written about that level, and it's such an insane departure from everything, yes, and it is a horror level, and it's so scary and so effective.
They filled up a bottle with my blood. It's down in the storm cellar. It's very dark down there.
You play through the entire first half of that level and there are no enemies, but you are so scared that you don't take more than like a couple of steps because, you know, they do so much with sound design and lighting that you're just like, well, something's gonna kill me in a second, right? Something's gonna pop out from behind a door, and it never does. Not until you get to the basement. It is such a well-designed level.
The Robbing the Cradle level features an abandoned asylum, which of course is a very common trope within horror. It's one of those primal fears, the loss of sanity and autonomy, and this is something that has a lot of its roots in Lovecraftian horror. There's an interesting parallel there between Thief and Eternal Darkness, where we're looking at the loss of sanity.
How the knowledge changed me, it will also change you. You too will come to understand, or you will perish.
Eternal Darkness is one of my go-to games whenever I talk about horror games and the kind of things that I'd like to do in horror games and the kind of things that I try to get publishers and platform holders to let me do in horror games.
I cannot say what was the true beginning, nor am I sure of its end. The Guardians grow restless.
I love the way they wrote Eternal Darkness.
My family has crossed their path. Their attention turns to my granddaughter.
The switching POV was brilliant because you don't know who's going to live and who's going to die.
It's like a Shakespearean tragedy in a way, because you know the ending for a lot of these characters, but then seeing them play out, you're kind of like, oh, you know, I was getting attached to that guy or girl, and now they just have met a horrible fate.
You not only don't know who's going to survive, you don't know who's going to turn out to be a bad guy.
It is now your destiny to fight the Eternal Darkness.
They break the fourth wall so marvelously, so exquisitely. It's got like a Lovecraftian sanity mechanic in there, but when your character's sanity starts to dwindle, they start hallucinating, and sometimes the hallucinations are things like monsters that aren't really there, or the maze, the labyrinth changes and things like that.
They're so interesting and varied, from statues' heads turn to watch you as you're walking down a hall, and you're like, did that happen? Or am I just really anxious? And it could be both. My personal favorite is the blue screen of death. Your game would just pretend that the console had crashed.
This isn't really happening.
The best one was when it looked like the game's save file got corrupted and all of your progress was wiped out. Talk about identifying what scares gamers the most.
This can't be happening.
Fucking diabolical.
I can remember, you know, thinking that my television had turned itself off. Watching as my character's head just falls off mid-walk cycle. I'm going, what is going on? Or the volume in your TV starts to go down.
The volume down trick was a big one for me, because when it first happened, I immediately ran to my remote and started turning it up all the way. So when the volume came back, it scared the crap out of me. I don't think you could get away with stuff like that now, just because of the way TVs are built.
I remember when we were getting close to shipping the game, I sat down with Mr. Miyamoto and a bunch of other leaders from Nintendo, and everyone was worried. We're telling people we're deleting their save game, and we're really not. What happens if they take their GameCube and smash it against the wall because they think it's a bug?
This can't be happening.
The answer was, I don't know what this means for Nintendo, but I know if someone did that to me, that would be a moment I would never forget for the rest of my life. I will always remember when that happened. And I think it's those kind of moments that everyone should aspire to.
I thought it was such a good way to play with the fact that this is a video game and not a movie. This is not something that you're watching. This is something that you are experiencing, and it's unique to you. It makes the story tailored to you and to what you've been doing.
Some people went insane on purpose, and other times people never wanted to see sanity effects, kept their sanity at maximum. So it's very interesting to see the dichotomies out there when people are playing the game, but that was really the opportunity and exploration we were allowed to do with that system. Breaking the fourth wall and having the player question what is real and what isn't.
A story centuries in the making. A thriller that blurs the line between reality and illusion.
My one thing that I would recommend to anyone who's doing these kind of things is don't be afraid. Push things.
You are hereby damned.
What made me do Legacy of Kain? All these people telling me we couldn't. What made us do some of the systems in Eternal Darkness? People saying, oh, you can never have a game with 12 characters. That made no sense to anybody. Video games are causing violence. And I'm like, oh yeah? I'll show you. And it's those kind of things that I think impassion creators to do something special for gamers.
The darkness comes! It will damn us all!
Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone, situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we are searching for the helicopter of our compatriots, Bravo Team. We continued our search for the other members, and it turned into a nightmare.
Damn it! Make for that mansion!
The very first time I played Resident Evil 1, the remake for GameCube, which is one of my favorite games ever, it was so cool.
And it came at just the right time. It was the remake we didn't know we needed. But it stepped it up.
Live the nightmare. Resident Evil, exclusively from Capcom. Rated M for mature, only on Nintendo GameCube.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think that that came out only 6 years after the original. But back then, technological and creative advances had very high returns in such a short period of time that we just will never ever see again, in my opinion.
So every time that Capcom make a remake of Resident Evil, they're trying to change few things. If you recall the Crimson Head, you were not prepared for that.
The Crimson Heads are essentially what a zombie evolves into if you don't kill them all the way. If they're only partially dead, as Billy Crystal said in Princess Bride, they're only mostly dead.
Resident Evil games traditionally got rid of the zombie bodies after you killed them. When you're playing the remake for the first time, they don't disappear, so you're assuming, maybe they finally have the technology to keep the bodies around, and then all of a sudden, they pop up. It's just like, holy shit. Like, what was that?
Wesker! Barry! Help!
You know, you could tell they were aware of the reception to the original game, but I think it was so ingrained in the DNA of that game that they kept the cheesiness alive.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Chris and Jill are iconic in that they're average people who are put into a horrific situation. I think both Chris and Jill, they don't have any special powers. I mean, Jill is the master of unlocking, but other than that...
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
You'd make better use of it.
You know, they're just average people. They're doing a job, and they're in this horrific situation. They are subject to all of the wear and tear that normal human beings are. They certainly can be killed, as you will find out many, many times over while you're trying to get through the game.
The notion of empowerment is always about, the power that you get for yourself.
No!
viral cultured freak.
And I do think that horror is playing a lot with that.
So there's this idea in media theory of the final girl, which was popularized by Carol J. Clover. So the final girl is someone who, unlike her peers, has managed to make it to the end of the film, often escaping the killer or even defeating him.
We want women to think of themselves as able to face these demons, face these horrors around every corner or behind every door. And Jill Valentine does it really well.
When we hear the term final girl, I think admittedly all of us jump straight to the slasher film, but really there was this quiet revolution that was happening within the PS1 and PS2 especially era of video games where we're seeing the final girl really come to the forefront.
So when you put a character which is vulnerable in that world, you don't need to have huge monster, you don't need to have huge power, you just have to, you know, have a good environment to be able to make the player get out alive. And the final girl is all about, you know, she's smart, she's maybe not the strongest of the friends.
Stay back!
But she's smart, and then she takes power, and then she succeeds in surviving. So it's a perfect scary game character.
What the hell was that?
All I know is that things are getting really screwy around here, and I got a weird feeling it's got something to do with me.
You know, so much of Silent Hill 3 is about this teenage girl, and she's not like a hot video game babe. Like, she is not Ivy from Soul Calibur 2.
Give up already.
She is a really normal-looking 2000s teenager.
Dad, it's me.
Heather in Silent Hill 3 is a very interesting character. She faces horrors that are really presented as being horrors equated to the feminine experience.
Just accept it, Alessa. The pain will disappear.
But what's interesting about Heather is that she's not a victim of her femininity. Although she's tackling these monsters, which, you know, might look very phallic, or she's being stalked by a man, but she never actually interacts with him. These are horrors that women sort of experience on the day-to-day, albeit, you know, they're presented in a much grander way in Silent Hill 3. But having her be such a grounded character, you relate to her more, especially as a woman.
Are you still following me?
Heather's performance was very, very natural. I remember the audition. She did the scene where she finds her dead father sitting in front of the TV, and she just really went for it. For the rest of the project, her line reads were always supernatural.
He loved me just like I was his very own daughter.
Insightful.
I never had a chance
She did a great job.
to tell you how happy you made me.
Well, horror games is all about, you know, death, but at the same time it's all about life. Horror games or scary games is all about make you feel something, and fear is being the strongest emotion that we can have. And then to play on that is really reflecting of the human that you are. And that's a strong feeling.
Fatal Frame 2 specifically, which is a Japanese game set in a little Japanese village in the middle of nowhere. genuinely one of the scariest games I've ever played. It's really frightening.
I don't want to kill anyone.
I had a mechanic, which was a camera, a kind of an exorcism camera.
It's such a cool device, you know. For horror design, it's awesome because you have to get the ghost in frame, you know, and you have to take a nice picture of the ghost in order to fight it.
With Fatal Frame, the ghosts were everywhere. That's why, for me, that's one of the best terror games that exists. Because the notion of space for the ghosts are not your notion of space. And like we said, you know, Fatal Frame is like a camera obscura. You have to wait at the last moment for the ghost to approach in your face, to kick your camera, to have the best Fatal Frame. Every time you're just at the limit of, no, that's not possible. No. I recall that I stopped the game once in a while playing Fatal Frame, which I did not in Resident Evil 4, for instance.
"1998. I'll never forget it. The virus broke out in a nearby mountain community, Raccoon City. 6 years have passed since that horrendous incident.
Forget everything you think you know about Resident Evil.
I'm under the President's order to rescue you.
My father?
Vayan por detrás. Who are these people?
Still to this day, the best game, in my opinion, that's ever been made is Resident Evil 4.
Shit.
It's an extraordinary game.
Son of...
You had to have, there was 2 discs worth on the GameCube. But it was huge, and it covered such a vast array of new dynamics. The shooting was amazing.
Freeze!
The horror was great. It looked fantastic.
The first time, like, you go into the village, in the first time, and it's that opening where they just throw you to the wolves, basically. And you're scrambling to survive. And then a guy with a chainsaw shows up, and it's just phenomenal.
It feels like you're outside in the woods, you know, like it feels really great, extremely well done. You know, you have to look at those details, like those tripwires that'll just blow up C4 and kill you immediately. Like the world is a world of traps and bad things, and you're just trying to survive this and try to, you know, rescue the president's daughter.
We kidnap the president's daughter in order to give her our power, and then send her back.
No.
It was such a departure and broke all the previous rules with Resident Evil, where it added action elements, throw out all the previous tank controls and survival elements where it was hard to control, and make it a fast action game, and then at the same time keep those elements of horror. I think a lot of people thought that wasn't possible until then, and they certainly showed the way that no, this is very possible. And this is how we're going to do it.
And I do think that it answered the aim that Mikami has as a designer to make, you know, this horrific action games. And again, if we talk about mechanics, we have following camera, but when we're stopped to shoot, the frame is just closer. They still have those strategy, those scare tactics that they play on to make that an experience in the genre and not just a shooter where you just, you know, shoot monsters.
They have redefined this whole series now. And this is so much better. felt so good from that viewpoint behind the character, and a lot of good decisions, you know, so much. The audio design, you name it, the balancing, what are you selling, what are you buying?
What are you buying? What are you selling?
Seriously, that whole game was perfection.
Thank you.
Resident Evil 4 was so good at what it did that everything after that was basically just trying to imitate that action-heavy, over-the-shoulder shot. And survival horror as we knew it kind of went away for a while.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
So the way that Patrick and I got involved in Silent Hill Homecoming was that a college friend of ours was a producer on the game when it was being developed at what was then The Collective.
The Collective had just done a Buffy the Vampire Slayer game. They had had some success using some outside writers who were not video game writers to come in and work on the game.
And it was gonna be the first time that an American company was going to be developing a Silent Hill game. It was going to be the first next-gen Silent Hill installment. They had been developing it for a little bit. They had come up with a story, and they'd gotten to the point where they said, we need to bring in some writers.
All right, kids, coming from film writing, which is a 100-page script, this here is all the writing for Silent Hill Homecoming. It is every in-game cinematic, it is every character bio, it is every string file. For example, grunt in pain, teeth knocked out, hard number 2. Like, we had to write all these little things in here. Here's Wheeler's ambient chatter for Alex. Like, I mean, there was just so much writing that had to be done in this game. The other interesting thing that happened while working on Silent Hill Homecoming is the movie came out. And boy, did we have to pull a lot from the film. That was a directive right from Konami, that they were now trying to turn that into a whole thing.
There are things from previous games that they wanted to sprinkle into these games to make sure that the fans had something to play with. Robbie the Rabbit, you know, the nurses from the movie. Obviously, Pyramid Head. Does Pyramid Head make sense in Silent Hill Homecoming? Not entirely.
Pyramid Head is absolutely retrofitted canon. But the truth is, Pyramid Head lives as a picture on a wall in the Silent Hill Historical Society as being an executioner as part of the town's history. And I would say, well, if Konami put the stamp on it, then it becomes canon. Like, people retrofit canon in Star Wars and the Avengers, Marvel, DC, like, we retrofit canon all the time. You work with some kind of intellectual property, you're gonna have a couple people who don't like it, or maybe a lot of people don't like it.
I had no idea.
And if you did, would you have done anything about it?
I actually thought that was a pretty good game. But yeah, I would just imagine that part of the problem with the post-Silent Hill 4 titles is just that, like, there was never one studio. Like, they would spread it around different studios with different visions and different capabilities, and I always got the impression that they didn't have enough budget to really get those titles to the quality that Capcom could do with Resident Evil.
I remember Shattered Memories being such a different take because of, you know, it does this psychological profile at the start of the game where it asks you various questions and you have to answer them, and then it tailors the game to those fears.
Yes?
The new patient is here.
The framing device is of a woman in a psychiatrist's office who's telling this story, like working through her memories, her shattered memories.
Let's get started then.
And the choices that you make in that office are reflected in the world of the game. So, for example, one of the most memorable sequences, you're coloring in a house, and it's a full mechanic. But then when we go back into the horror story, you approach a house and it's all the colors that you did in the psychiatrist's office, because this is her story. It's the story she's telling.
We knew that the kind of survival horror template had become a bit old, right, a bit stagnant. And so we really tried to throw out all the assumptions about what a horror game is, right? Which at that time were pretty much going back to Alone in the Dark and Resident Evil as these two games that kind of define things. You're using guns, bludgeoning things to beat up on enemies that are usually kind of dumb and numerous and zombie-like, right? And it felt weird to us looking at Silent Hill and going, well, this is a psychological horror.
Where are you taking me? Where am I?
If you go watch a movie in that genre, or you go read a book in that genre, the protagonist is not running around with a pipe bludgeoning zombies. Everyone has dreams where they are being chased by someone and they can't escape, right? It's like a very kind of primal fear. The chase is the form of action. I remember trying to justify it by saying it was Pac-Man. There's a certain thing where like executives, they're like, what even is chase gameplay? How does that work? And I'd be like, it's Pac-Man. Right, you're in a maze being chased by ghosts, it's Pac-Man, right? And then they're like, oh, okay, I understand there's like a core existing example of this thing working, then I'm gonna feel clever.
So in Silent Hill Downpour, there was talk and serious consideration of just like taking combat entirely out of the game, like not giving you the ability to have combat. They had experimented with it and Konami wasn't happy with it and said no. Give the player the ability to fight back.
Silent Hill Downpour, I feel, just got like a really bad rap because it was trying to do new things when Silent Hill players just wanted more Silent Hill.
What I mostly saw was a Central European, Czech team trying to ape Silent Hill 2. They were clearly keyed in on Silent Hill 2 and maybe a little bit of Silent Hill 3. They were trying their damnedest to replicate that and imitate it. I don't know that anybody could, really. My advice to them was like, look, don't try to mimic Silent Hill 2. Don't try to capture J-horror, like Japanese horror. Become Czech horror, because you guys are actually really creepy. Let's take a look around your town. It's like right up the street from the development studio was this crematorium that was just going 24/7 and filling the sky with smoke and weird smells. They made churches out of bones. There was a dark element in the Czech Republic, and it was a former Soviet state, so it kind of had that like Soviet concrete brutalism and industrialization happening around the town. I was like, forget what the Japanese teams have done with Silent Hill. That's like uniquely theirs, and we're not going to imitate it. Let's figure out what the Czech Silent Hill looks like. So that's where we went.
What is this place? That was what got me into Silent Hill in the first place. Like, oh wow, this is such an interesting vibe. Like, this is a team that is just, running with it and putting something out there that feels very fresh and unique. So if we're just going to spend all our time copying what that team did, you've already lost, right? You've already stepped away from that idea of trying to make something interesting.
So many horror games that came out in that period, like the early aughts up into almost, like for like 10 years, let's call it. Horror was very action driven. Like Dead Space was scary as hell. Clearly a horror game. But a little more of an action one, and it was a little more, there was a little more shooty bang bang gun stuff happening in that than creeping around and feeling, vulnerable and stuff.
Resident Evil used those elements in the way that it did. It just eventually became the dominating approach in the genre.
There's not just one type of horror game. There's different subgenres within it, just like there's subgenres of horror fiction and horror film. The rules about those games, the rules to making them, the kind of best practices that you put into place is very different depending on, like, are you a survival horror game or are you a horror shooter? Are you sci-fi horror? Are you gothic horror? Are you a walking sim kind of horror game? Like, there's different rules and there's different expectations.
There's something very important that my colleague Matthew Weiss wrote in one essay of my book. All survival horror games are horror games, but not all horror games are survival horror. This label that we call survival horror was, one moment in history. And in my book, if we have to always give a period, that's 92 to 2005, when Resident Evil 4 come in, it's gone. Survival is gone.
So I remember a long time ago, and this was in a time when survival horror was considered dead. Someone said to me how survival horror is still alive and it's Dark Souls.
Then from the dark, they came.
And I really thought about that. Man, yeah, like, I get that. That has always been a part of FromSoft games, this idea that you're in a world that is not safe for you, and you have to think very carefully about whether this is something you want to engage with or not.
I think FromSoft games kind of have another sense of horror because they can be so unforgiving at times. So that kind of leads to the horror, and then with Bloodborne is just complete horror aesthetic.
You're fighting werewolves and, like zombie people and weird snake sorcerers and all this, like, quite terrifying imagery.
But most importantly, as the player, you really are fighting for your life when you play these games. You're really trying your best to survive.
It's interesting because it is a very different kind of fear. But I do think one of the reasons people love those games so much is they have learned to just take the essence of that survival horror of, like, this, oh fuck, I have low resources and I'm going to die. They've translated it into this complete new kind of way of looking at it.
Arguably, that paved the way for a resurgence of the more traditional style of survival horror. Resident Evil 7 and 8 really took us back to the roots of horror in that series, with what some argue to be some of the scariest entries into the franchise.
Give me games which are as good as Resident Evil 7, and then I'm gonna give you all my love, all my money, all my time.
Welcome to the family, son.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
We're now seeing remakes of all of these classics, such as Silent Hill 2, Dead Space, a multitude of the Resident Evil games.
This time, it has to be different.
The indie space has had a huge revitalization of survival horror. We're seeing things like Crow Country, Sorry We're Closed, Hollow Body, and so many more.
It has opened the door for the whole kind of survival horror genre.
For a period, it really seemed like survival horror had died. But like the zombies that plague its hallways, it always gets back up. You cannot kill survival horror.